You've seen the movie, now hear the real story. On October 3, 1993, American Special Forces launched a raid in Mogadishu, Somalia. The mission was supposed to take 30 minutes. It lasted 18 hours. 2 Black Hawk helicopters were shot down. 18 Americans lost their lives. 73 were wounded, and the bodies of U.S. soldiers were dragged through the streets on live television. It was the most intense urban combat Americans had faced since Vietnam. This is the true story of Black Hawk Down and why it still matters today. Subscribe, because this battle changed how America fights wars. To understand what happened in Mogadishu, you need to understand what Somalia was in 1993. It wasn't a country anymore, it was a nightmare. The Somali government had collapsed in 1991. What followed was civil war, chaos, and famine. Warlords carved up the country into fiefdoms. They fought each other with tanks, artillery, and child soldiers, and they used food as a weapon. International aid was pouring into Somalia. Rice, grain, medicine. But the warlords seized it. They hoarded it. They let their enemies starve while their fighters ate well. By 1992, an estimated 300,000 Somalis had perished from famine. Children with swollen bellies and hollow eyes stared out from magazine covers. The world watched in horror. President George H.W. Bush decided to act. In December 1992, Operation Restore Hope sent 25,000 American troops to Somalia. Their mission was humanitarian: protect the food shipments, feed the starving, restore order. It worked, at first. The presence of American forces broke the warlords' stranglehold on aid. Food reached the people who needed it. The famine eased. Lives were saved. But then the mission changed. By 1993, the UN decided that humanitarian aid wasn't enough. To truly stabilize Somalia, they needed to disarm the warlords and rebuild the government. That meant confrontation. The most powerful warlord in Mogadishu was Mohammed Farah Aidid. Aidid controlled the Haber-Gider clan, one of the largest and most powerful in Somalia. He had thousands of fighters. He had technicals, pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns. He had the loyalty of much of southern Mogadishu, and he had no intention of giving up power. In June 1993, Aidid's forces ambushed a Pakistani peacekeeping patrol. 24 Pakistani soldiers were slaughtered. Some were skinned alive. The bodies were mutilated. The UN declared Aidid a war criminal. A $25,000 bounty was placed on his head. Now the mission wasn't just humanitarian. Now America was hunting a warlord. Task Force Ranger arrived in Mogadishu on August 22, 1993. This was an elite unit assembled specifically to capture Aidid and his top lieutenants. Delta Force Operators, the Army's premier counter-terrorism unit. Army Rangers, light infantry trained for rapid assault. The 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers, the best helicopter pilots in the world. They also had Navy SEALs, Air Force combat controllers, and CIA operatives. The best America had, about 450 operators total. Their commander was Major General William Garrison, a Special Forces legend who had spent decades in the shadows. Garrison was confident but cautious. He knew Mogadishu was dangerous. He requested AC-130 gunships for fire support. He was denied. The UN thought gunships were too aggressive. He would fight with what he had. Over the next 6 weeks, Task Force Ranger launched 6 raids into Mogadishu. Each raid followed the same pattern. Helicopters would swoop in. Operators would fast rope onto a target building, snatch the targets, and fly out before the Somalis could react. The raids were successful tactically. They captured several of Aidid's associates, but Aidid himself remained free. And each raid taught the Somalis something about American tactics. They learned that helicopters were vulnerable. They learned that Americans would come to rescue downed aircraft. They learned that RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, could bring down a Black Hawk. They were waiting for their chance. October 3, 1993, a Sunday afternoon. Intelligence reported that 2 of Aidid's top lieutenants, Omar Salad Elmi and Mohammed Hassan Awale, were meeting at a building near the Bakara market. The Bakara market was the heart of Aidid's territory. It was a dense maze of buildings, alleyways, and streets, perfect terrain for an ambush. Task Force Ranger had avoided operating there, but this intelligence was too good to pass up. Garrison approved the mission. It would launch at 3 p.m., broad daylight in the middle of the most hostile neighborhood in Mogadishu. Some officers questioned the timing. Daylight raids were more dangerous, but Garrison believed speed would compensate for visibility. The assault force consisted of 19 aircraft, Black Hawks and Little Birds, carrying 160 men. The plan was simple. Delta operators would fast rope onto the target building and secure the prisoners. Rangers would establish a perimeter around the block. A ground convoy of Humvees and trucks would drive in to extract everyone. 30 minutes, in and out, just like the previous 6 raids. At 3:42 p.m., the assault began. Black Hawks thundered over Mogadishu, kicking up clouds of dust. Little Bird helicopters darted between buildings. Delta operators slid down ropes onto the target building. Within minutes, the 2 targets were captured, along with 22 other Somalis. The assault force was preparing to extract. Then the city erupted. Throughout Mogadishu, the word spread instantly. The Rangers were in Bakara Market. Everyone with a gun, militiamen, clan fighters, armed civilians, began converging on the area. Thousands of Somalis poured into the streets. Many were Aidid's fighters. Many were ordinary people who simply hated the Americans. Some were women and children used as human shields. The streets became rivers of hostility. At 4:20 p.m., everything changed. Super 6-1, a Black Hawk piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Cliff Wolcott, was circling above the target area, providing cover. An RPG streaked up from the street and struck the helicopter's tail rotor. The Black Hawk began to spin. Wolcott fought the controls, but there was nothing he could do. The helicopter corkscrewed down and crashed into a narrow alley about 300 meters from the target building. 5 crew members were aboard. Wolcott and his co-pilot were gone instantly. 3 others were trapped in the wreckage. Now the mission changed completely. No American would be left behind. That was the code. That was sacred. General Garrison ordered all available forces to converge on the crash site. The prisoner extraction became a rescue mission. Staff Sergeant Matt Eversman, a 26-year-old Ranger squad leader, was ordered to move his chalk, his squad, to secure the crash site. They began fighting through the streets. It was block by block, building by building urban combat. Somalis fired from rooftops, windows, doorways, and alleyways. It was like the whole city was shooting at us, one ranger later recalled. Everywhere you looked, muzzle flashes. The Rangers were trained for quick raids, not sustained urban combat. They were running low on ammunition, they were taking casualties, and they were still blocks away from the crash site. Meanwhile, the ground convoy was trying to reach the same location. Lieutenant Colonel Danny McKnight commanded the convoy, a column of Humvees and 5-ton trucks that was supposed to pick up the assault force and prisoners. But McKnight's convoy was lost. The streets of Mogadishu were a maze. Many had no names, maps were outdated, and the Somalis had set up roadblocks everywhere. McKnight's convoy drove in circles, taking fire the entire time. RPGs slammed into vehicles. Machine gun fire raked the column. Men were hit in every vehicle. "We've got casualties. We're taking heavy fire. I need directions to the crash site." McKnight radioed desperately. Directions came from the helicopters above. Turn left, turn right. But every turn led into another ambush. McKnight's convoy never reached the crash site. After losing 5 men and dozens wounded, he was ordered to return to base. The men at the crash site would have to hold on their own. At 4:40 p.m., the nightmare doubled. Super 6-4, another Black Hawk, piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant, was hit by an RPG near the tail. Durant fought to control the aircraft, but it was hopeless. The Black Hawk spun down and crashed in a neighborhood several blocks from the first crash site. Durant survived the crash with a broken back. His crew chiefs were badly injured. The co-pilot was gone. Now there were 2 crash sites, hundreds of enemies, and not enough Americans to secure either location. At the second crash site, Mike Durant and his surviving crew were alone. Two Delta snipers, Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Shughart, were circling overhead in another helicopter. They could see Somalis converging on the wreckage. They requested permission to insert and protect the survivors. The request was denied. It was too dangerous. There were hundreds of hostiles in the area. Gordon and Shughart requested again. Denied. They requested a third time. Denied. On their fourth request, they were approved. The two snipers were inserted by helicopter about 100 meters from the crash site. They fought their way through Somalis to reach Durant and the surviving crew chief. For several minutes, Gordon and Shughart held off waves of attackers. They pulled Durant from the wreckage. They established defensive positions. They fought with rifles, then pistols. Gary Gordon was hit and went down. Randy Shughart took his weapon and kept fighting. Then Shughart was overwhelmed. Before he fell, he handed his pistol to Mike Durant. "Good luck," he said. Moments later, Somalis overran the position. Gordon and Shughart were gone. The crew chief was gone. Only Durant survived, captured by the mob and dragged away. Gary Gordon and Randy Shughart were later awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously, the first medals of honor since Vietnam. They knew they were going to die. They went anyway. Night fell over Mogadishu. At the first crash site, about 99 Americans were dug in around the wreckage. Delta operators, Rangers, Air Force combat controllers, and helicopter crew members. They formed a tight perimeter. They treated wounded with whatever supplies they had. They rationed ammunition. Some men were down to their last magazine. Somalis attacked throughout the night. Gunfire was constant. RPGs whooshed overhead and exploded against buildings. Staff Sergeant Jeff Strucker, who had made a harrowing convoy run earlier, later described the scene. "It was like the 4th of July, except every explosion was trying to kill us." The men held. They fought off assault after assault. They refused to abandon the crash site. But they couldn't hold forever. Back at base, General Garrison was organizing a rescue. The problem was, he didn't have enough forces. Task Force Ranger was designed for quick strikes, not sustained combat. They had no tanks, no armored vehicles. Garrison requested help from the 10th Mountain Division, conventional Army troops stationed at the Mogadishu airport. They had armored personnel carriers. They had numbers. But the 10th Mountain needed time to organize, and they needed Pakistani and Malaysian forces to provide additional armored vehicles. It took hours to coordinate the relief column, hours while Americans fought and bled in the streets. At 11:23 p.m., the relief column finally departed. It consisted of about 100 vehicles, American Humvees, Pakistani tanks, Malaysian armored personnel carriers, over 1,000 soldiers. They fought their way through Mogadishu, block by bloody block. Somalis attacked the column continuously. Vehicles were hit, men were wounded, but they kept coming. At approximately 2 a.m. on October 4th, the lead elements of the relief column reached the first crash site. The Americans at the perimeter heard the rumble of tanks. They saw headlights approaching. Then they saw the most beautiful sight of their lives: friendly forces. The evacuation began. Wounded were loaded onto vehicles. The fallen were recovered. The surviving defenders piled into any vehicle with space. But there weren't enough vehicles. Some men would have to move on foot, using the armored vehicles as cover. This became the Mogadishu Mile, a desperate running battle through hostile streets as the column fought its way back to the Pakistani stadium. Men who had been fighting all night now ran alongside vehicles, firing at Somalis on rooftops, dragging wounded comrades, gasping for breath. Specialist Sean Nelson, a ranger who had been wounded multiple times, later recalled, "I didn't think about anything except putting one foot in front of the other. Just keep moving. Just get home." At 6:30 a.m., the survivors reached the Pakistani stadium. The battle was over. The toll was devastating. 18 Americans lost their lives. 73 were wounded, many grievously, with injuries that would affect them for life. Estimates of Somali casualties varied wildly, from 300 to over 2,000. Many were fighters. Many were civilians. In the chaos of urban combat, it was often impossible to tell the difference. One American, Mike Durant, was in enemy hands. He would be held for 11 days before being released in a negotiated exchange. And the images that shocked America, the bodies of American soldiers being dragged through the streets by jubilant mobs. Those images ran on every television network. They showed the face of American defeat. For many Americans, it was the first time they realized their country was at war in Somalia. The political aftermath was immediate. President Clinton, who had inherited the Somalia mission from Bush, faced a firestorm of criticism. Why were Americans losing their lives in Africa? What was the mission? Why didn't our forces have armor? Why weren't there enough troops? Within days, Clinton announced that all American forces would be withdrawn from Somalia within 6 months. The mission to capture Aidid was abandoned. Aidid remained free. He never faced justice. He perished in 1996 during a battle with rival militiamen, but not by American hands. Somalia descended back into chaos. It would remain a failed state for decades. The strategic consequences extended far beyond Somalia. The Clinton administration became extremely cautious about military intervention. The shadow of Mogadishu hung over every foreign policy discussion. When genocide erupted in Rwanda in April 1994, America did nothing. Over 100 days, approximately 800,000 Tutsis were slaughtered by Hutu extremists. Administration officials later admitted that Somalia influenced their decision not to intervene. They feared another Black Hawk Down. They feared American casualties on television. And so they watched while nearly 1 million people were massacred. Rwanda's ghosts haunt American foreign policy to this day, and those ghosts trace back to Mogadishu. America's enemies also learned from Black Hawk Down. Osama bin Laden specifically cited Somalia as evidence of American weakness. In interviews and statements, he argued that Americans were soft, that they would retreat if you inflicted enough casualties. We have seen in the last decade the decline of the American government and the weakness of the American soldier, bin Laden said. He is ready to wage cold wars, but unprepared to fight long wars. This was proven in Beirut when the Marines fled, and it was proven in Somalia. This belief that America could be driven out by spectacular violence influenced al-Qaeda's planning for years. It shaped the attacks on the embassies in 1998, the USS Cole in 2000, and ultimately 9/11. The terrorists were wrong about American resolve, but they learned their lesson from Mogadishu. The military learned its own lessons. The problems exposed in Mogadishu, communication failures, intelligence gaps, lack of armored vehicles, insufficient coordination between units, drove reforms throughout the Special Operations community. The Joint Special Operations Command became more integrated. Urban combat training intensified. Rules of engagement were reconsidered. The Rangers who fought in Mogadishu went on to train the next generation of soldiers. Their experience informed doctrine that would be used in Iraq and Afghanistan. In a sense, the men who suffered on October 3, 1993, made future operations more successful. Their pain had purpose. The 18 Americans who lost their lives in Mogadishu deserve to be remembered by name. The Medal of Honor recipients: Master Sergeant Gary Gordon, Sergeant First Class Randy Shughart. The helicopter crews: Chief Warrant Officer Cliff Wolcott, Chief Warrant Officer Donovan Briley, Staff Sergeant William Cleveland, Staff Sergeant Thomas Field. The Delta operators: Sergeant First Class Earl Fillmore, Sergeant First Class Matt Rierson, Master Sergeant Timothy Martin. The Rangers: Corporal Jamie Smith, Specialist James Cavaco, Sergeant James Joyce, Sergeant Dominic Pilla, Sergeant Lorenzo Ruiz, Sergeant Casey Joyce, Sergeant Cornell Houston, Private First Class Richard Kowalewski, Private First Class James Martin. They went to help a starving nation. They fought with extraordinary courage. They held their ground when everything was against them. And they never left a man behind. The movie Black Hawk Down was released in 2001, directed by Ridley Scott. It was based on Mark Bowden's book of the same name, a meticulous reconstruction of the battle based on interviews with survivors, radio transcripts, and military records. The film brought the battle to public attention. It showed the chaos, the courage, and the cost of urban warfare. But movies can't capture everything. They can't capture the smell of cordite and blood, the screams of wounded men, the weight of a friend's body as you carry him to cover. They can't capture the decades of nightmares, the survivor's guilt, the marriages that fell apart, the men who never recovered. The veterans of Mogadishu carry that battle with them every day. 30 minutes, that's how long the mission was supposed to take. Instead, it took 18 hours and 18 American lives. It ended a humanitarian mission. It shaped a decade of foreign policy. It emboldened America's enemies. It created a generation of special operators forged in fire. The Battle of Mogadishu was a tactical victory. The Americans accomplished their mission and inflicted massive casualties on the enemy. But it was a strategic defeat. America withdrew, the warlords remained, and the world learned that taking American lives on camera could change policy. That contradiction, winning the battle, losing the war, defines Mogadishu. And it's a contradiction American soldiers have faced again and again since. The next time you see a headline about Somalia, about al-Shabaab terrorists, about piracy, about another failed intervention, remember October 3rd, 1993, because everything happening there today traces back to that Sunday afternoon. Subscribe for more military history that matters. Share this video so the 18 are never forgotten. Comment, should America have stayed in Somalia? This video is for the men who fought in Mogadishu. They went in expecting 30 minutes. They gave everything. No man left behind.